Alrighty, let's give it one more minute. We can jump into things. Alrighty, I think we can get started. So yeah, thank you everybody for joining sort of the first ever engine hire training day. Kind of the idea, I guess, behind this is, as the platform keeps expanding, as we keep adding new features, we're realizing kind of more and more that not everybody knows how to use all of it, and there's different sort of strategies and things that we learn kind of interacting with so many different companies that we hope might add some value to you as well. And so yeah, kind of the idea of this is to try to deep dive into some of the core topics encompassing the engine hire platform and just share a little bit on more on how to use them and answer your questions around them. So, please feel free to ask questions throughout. You can speak up, you can put them in the chat. As much as possible, I would encourage you to keep the questions relevant to the topic if possible. Yes, Heather, you will get the recording after, so don't worry about that. Yeah, no problem. Cool. So I guess without further ado, we'll start with the first topic, which is demystifying application forms and profiles. And so before I get started, does anyone have any questions they want to ask right off the bat? Okay, let's get started. One more little thing I'll say, by the way, is we're constantly trying to think of new ways to improve the sort of like education around the platform. So it sort of started with the YouTube videos. It's progressed to the knowledge base. I think from what I've heard, a lot of people benefit from the What's New This Week emails. Now we're trying this training day. So if you have any ideas, anything you've experienced, anything that you think might help, we're always all ears for feedback. So please share those kinds of things with us. But yeah, alrighty. I guess it's not as interactive as I would have liked, but hopefully everyone can see my screen. Mary, you tell me if I'm ever saying something that doesn't make any sense. So what you're seeing here is the profile builder. And some of you may have spent some time in here, some of you may have not, but the profile builder is kind of where most of the construction of application forms and profiles and all of the structure around that happens. And so I'm going to try to start with the basics and move deeper and deeper into more sort of specifics and special functionalities and things like that. So, bear with me if there's stuff that you already know, and please feel free to ask questions if there are certain things that you want to know. But generally what happens in the profile builder is it will be split into the two primary groups. So at the top, you will have everything related to candidate stuff. And candidates, is our sort of catch-all term for nannies or applicants, or really the people who do the work. And then clients is the category for everyone who's doing the hiring. Is usually how it shakes out. And so within the profile builder, there's three sort of primary components. You'll have an application type, you'll have a profile type, and you'll have a section type. And this applies to both candidates and clients. And so the application is the form that a candidate or a client typically fills in on your website to first enter your system. So like an application form, a registration form, that sort of thing. And so you'll see for the application type specifically, there'll be this little icon to open up the application form in a new tab or a new window. And so when it comes to the application forms, there's sort of two ways to look at it. So when you're logged in as an administrator, you will be seeing your application form in the admin view. And so in the admin view, you may see things and experience things a little bit differently from what an actual candidate or what an actual client might see when they come to visit your website. And there's advantages to both. So if you want to know exactly what a candidate is going to experience when they come to your website, you'll want to make sure that either you are logged out, so you're not logged in as an admin, or what you can do is open it in a separate window. So for example, you may open, if you're using Google Chrome, you may open it in a new incognito window and then just sort of grab the application form from there and put it in like that. And you'll see that, you know, you're not logged in. There's no login, log out, that sort of thing at the top. But this is what an actual applicant, candidate, client will see when they come to your website and they're applying for the first time. But you know, generally when you're looking at an application form, you'll see that there's a variety of different questions and sections and that sort of thing. And at the bottom, the option for someone to submit. So yeah, when it comes to the application form itself, what you'll find is that your application forms and your profiles are built up of a combination of sections. So a section is like a combination of questions or fields or information that are sort of grouped under a common theme, you know, like contact information or experience or education or whatever. The sections are sort of like the building blocks, and then your applications and your profiles are made up of a combination of these sections. So if we click the little pencil icon to edit our application, we'll see that it's currently made up of a combination of sections. So there's a section for contact information, there's a section for additional information, there's a section for references, section for education. And you know, if you want to drill down into that specific section, there's an option within each section to edit the section builder directly from there. Or you can go to the appropriate section in the table view here and click to edit it from there. Hopefully that's making sense. Again, please stop me if you have questions, or feel free to message in the chat if you have questions. And so let's say we wanted to create a new section in our application form asking about their favorite foods. So we could click to add. So we click to add, and then we name our section kind of whatever we want. So we're going to call this one favorite foods. And you'll see there's a variety of different builders. The most common ones are the ones application, profile, and section. To give you a quick sense of the other ones, so file information is a special section type of files that people upload with additional information like expiration dates and things like that. I'll dive into that in a little more detail in a little bit. Reference check sections are a special section for building a form that you use for checking references. Again, something we can dive into a little bit later. Placement job section is a section that you can use to custom build a form for posting long-term placement jobs. Add user is a special builder type for customizing the form that you use when you are using the add client or add candidate to customize this form. I'm starting to realize even now that there's probably too many special topics to dive into to cover cover everything, even in the 45 minutes that we have together. So if you have questions about any of these things after the fact, you know, chances are we have a video on it. Otherwise, we'll make one for you, or we can show you how it works. So please ask about that kind of thing. But most of the time, what you'll be wanting to do is add a section that goes into a profile or an application. So let's say we want to build this section for candidates around their favorite foods. So we'll add a user type. So we select the user type candidate and client. 99% of the time, you're going to be doing candidate or client. The only time you use unspecified is if you're creating like a contact us form to use for your website. in which case we may not even be sure if they're a candidate or a client. And that becomes one of the questions in the form, like, hey, are you somebody looking for a job? Are you looking to hire somebody? And that's how we figure out if they're a candidate or a client. But yeah, most of the time you're going candidate or client. Next, you're selecting a section type. And so section types, there's a variety of different section types. Most often it's a people type section, and a people type section means it's part of a user profile, a candidate or a client general profile. There's a variety of other sort of special section types. So like children for adding children's information, references, experience, education, pets, bookings, and contacts. So these are sort of like special section types designed for housing special types of information. But again, most of the time you'll be wanting a people section type. What you just saw pop up here is something we call concurrent builders. And so what concurrent builders are other sections that we've created that are already candidates people type sections. And what this does is adding these concurrent builders prevents us from using a field in the database that's already been used by a different section. So some of you may have experienced the fields in the database, and we'll go into that in a second here. But you want to make sure that there's never an overlap between the field that you're using in the database in one section versus the field that you're using in a different section, because then when somebody enters in that information, it'll write to the same field in the database, and that creates messy things where you can end up with overlap and somebody writing information to the same spot in two different places, and some of you may have experienced that, and it's not fun. So in general, these concurrent builders are selected for you automatically, but that's just what they mean. Okay, so now we get to the actual building of this section. So we click to add a field. Check the chat. Can you give an example of an overlap? Yep, so I'll do that right now. So let's say we're adding a field. You know, do you prefer sweet or salty foods more? And now there's a variety of different field types. So there's icons here for the most common ones. Text box is sort of one line of text. Like this here is an example of a text box, just one line where I can type whatever I want. A text area is very similar to a text box, but it's just a larger version. And you know, really fundamentally, they hold the same thing, but a text area is just, it's a good way to indicate to the person that you expect more text or less text. A radio select is a list of options where they're picking one option. A checkbox is a list of options where they're selecting multiple options. A date is a date picker. A multi-select is it can be both a radio or a checklist or a checkbox, where it's, instead of showing the full list, it's showing a drop down of options, and they select something from a drop down. So fundamentally, it's the same as a radio or a checkbox, but the form factor is a little bit different. Files is for things that you want uploaded files. Section titles are just like lines of text to help add headings or dividers or that kind of thing. And HTML is for adding kind of custom HTML text. So let's say for sweet or salty, we're going to make this a radio. So we'll say, we'll add options, sweet, salty. I like both equally. So these are the options for this radio. And our expectation is that they're going to pick one of them. And now you'll see in the model field, it's selected the database field that this is going to write to. So something called a selector 2. Now you might be wondering what happened to selector 1. And the reason there's no selector 1 in this list is because selector 1 is already being used by one of the other sections. So if I remove all of the concurrent builders, you'll see now that selector 1 is an option. But if I use selector 1 is also being used by another section, which means if the user puts in sweet for this question, it will also show sweet as the answer to whatever other question is also using selector 1, because they're both reading from the same field in the database. I don't know if that makes sense to answer your question, but that's sort of like an example of what can happen if you have, great. Awesome. So So now I'm going to select all of the concurrent builders again, and you'll see selector 1 is no longer an option. So I'm going to select selector 2. And now we can add more fields. So let's say, we'll put in a field. Yes, thanks, Mary. So great point. So let's say we go to the layout here. This is what it looks like. Do you prefer sweet, salty foods? And we'll get this little selector, sweet, salty. I like both equally. Now I'm going to add in another field. What is your favorite restaurant? And in this case, we'll put a text box because we're not really expecting an essay. It's more just like a one-line free type, whatever you want. And so we can keep adding fields to our section as we keep going. Now, what you'll see down here is something called fields hidden from client. And this is a really, really important thing where it allows us to select specific fields in this section, this candidate section, that when we share this candidate profile with the client, we don't want the client to see that information. So this is the place where we want to make sure that anything that we want to keep private or not share with the client, we select here. So, classic examples of this are like email addresses, phone numbers, street addresses, legal status, things like that, that you really don't want the client to see. So let's say for whatever reason, we really don't want the client to know our candidate's favorite restaurant. So I can select that and it will be hidden from the client. There may be times also where, so this is the most common use of these sort of 3 dropdowns. The other one is admin and client only fields. So this is when you want something added to a section of a candidate profile that the candidate actually doesn't see. So an example of this might be like a summary of your opinion on a candidate. Now, you might not want the candidate to see that, but you actually only want admins to see that, and you only want clients who you share that candidate profile with to see that. So this is less commonly used, but there may be cases where you don't want the candidate to see something, but you only want the client when you share the profile to see it. And the final option is admin only fields. So you may want to add fields to the candidate sections that only you as an admin can fill in, but neither the candidate nor the client can see it. But the one you want to pay the most attention to is this one, fields hidden from client, to make sure that they're not seeing something you don't want them to see. So once we're sort of happy with this, we will create this section, and we can see that we created our favorite food section. Now you'll see that the favorite food section is grayed out. And the reason that it's grayed out is it's not currently being used in an application form or a profile, which means we've created this section, we've created this building block, but we're not actually using it anywhere. And that actually also means you can delete it without any worries if you don't want it anymore. Whereas you can see the education section is not grayed out, but the trash can is grayed out. And the reason the trash can is grayed out is because it's being used somewhere. So we don't want you to accidentally delete it until we remove it from the application form or the profile. So hopefully that makes sense. So let's use our favorite food section. So we'll go into the candidate application form. We'll edit it again. And I'm going to add a field. In this case, I'm going to add a section. And the section I'm going to add is favorite foods. So I'm going to name this favorite foods. Favorite food. Yep. And so if I save that, now if I go back to the application form and I refresh this, you will see that our new favorite food section has been added here. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Like the idea is, and you'll also see now that our favorite food section is not grayed out anymore. So in our favorite food section, we created the fields that we want to include in this sort of topic. And then we took this topic, we took this block and we put it into the application form. And that added all of the questions that were in that section into the application form. One of the cool things is in the application form itself. Now, sometimes this whole this profile builder thing can get a little bit confusing. Let's say you already have an application form and you just want to make some minor edits. So like in our favorite food section, we want to make a minor edit. You'll see that every question has a little pencil icon next to it if you look at it from logged in as an admin. So if I click this little pencil icon, we can see that we can easily make some edits to just this question. So let's say we want to add another option to the list. So like sweet, salty, I like both equally. I hate both. Bring on the sour. So very easily you can see we added that option to the thing here, and it'll automatically update profile builder and everything. So if you're not looking to make big edits to your application form, you just want to tweak some of these little things. The best way to do that actually is to open up the application form and just edit it directly from this screen. Another thing you can do here is make questions required or not required. And so, you'll see that little star indicator disappear if a question is not required anymore. That's sort of a very high level of how the application form is built. Now, I'll dive into some of the more kind of detailed things. Does anyone have any questions about what I've sort of showed so far? Okay. Let's keep going. So let's say you want to edit what the sort of title is here or the instructions or that kind of thing. How do you do that? So you would go into our profile builder again, and you would click on this little gear icon to edit the settings of the application form. So there's a variety of different settings. Again, maybe too many for me to go over all right now. So if you do have any questions about any of these, please feel free to reach out to us after. But some of the key ones that I want to go over are, first of all, let's say we want to change this to candidate application form. So I'm going to go here, and that's actually just pulling the name that we gave this application. So I'm just going to change this, go to candidate application form, save that. And it changes that. Now, if I want to change the instructions here, some of you may not even have instructions at all, and you may want to add instructions after watching this. So you click on this little gear icon, and we go into the profile instruction. So we can see sort of the instructions that we've given here. I just added the favorite food section, so our profile has gone a little long, our application form has gone a little longer. I'm going to say, please allow for 20 minutes to complete this application. And if you have any issues, please email Mary at Engine Hire. If I save that, you can see that it's updated my instructions. And so you can kind of go through this and see the variety of different settings that you have available to you. Another one that's kind of important is the submission confirmation message. So if you try submitting an application form, you'll see a pop-up sort of generated of the a pop-up comes up which is kind of like a confirmation message that when they submitted the application form. And so you can customize the text that appears here. So hopefully that's pretty self-explanatory. You can decide whether you want to send a notification email to someone on your team when the application is submitted. Most of you should already have this set up, but you can customize which emails receive that notification. You can decide whether you want to send a summary of the submission to the applicant. So the candidate or the client will then automatically get an email with a full summary of everything that they entered into the form. Yeah, I think that's sort of enough detail for that here. What you can also do then is, I want to go over some of the more kind of detailed sections or some of the special sections. So one of the special sections are things like references and education. And what makes these sections special is they're sort of multi-add sections. So we don't know necessarily how many references this person's going to add. So we create a form that sort of defines one reference. So they can go ahead and put that in. Hopefully people aren't putting their mom as their reference, but and so they can go ahead and put in sort of as many references as they want. And so that's sort of what makes these sections special. And really the only difference between those is if we look at the reference section, it's built in the profile builder exactly the same way as we saw before. The only difference is the section type, instead of being people, is reference. So hopefully that makes sense. Most of these special section types are all for these types of sections that are added, are sort of multi-add, where we define what one block is, and then we allow people to add as many of these as they want as they kind of keep going. Okay. One of the other things that I want to go over is on the client side, there's a particular section that's very important, which is the booking section. So we'll take a look at that. This is how clients can create bookings for services, on the sort of short-term on-call side of things. So generally what you might have is a start time and an end time. For different fields in the profile builder, you will see a drop down of what we call properties. So properties are a variety of different sort of things that you can use to customize that specific field. One of the properties that is actually really important, which I'll go over, sorry, I don't know what's going on with my mouse, but let's say in the favorite food section. So let's say we want to add a question, what is your favorite brand of potato chip? And then we'll add, Lay's, Ruffles. Drawing a blank here, I don't need enough chips, but whatever, Lay's and Ruffles. But let's say we only want to show them this question if they actually like salty foods. If they like sweet foods, maybe we want to ask them a different question. So we'll add another question like, which of the following, or please select the chocolates that you like. And we'll make this a checkbox so they can select multiple. So we'll put Snickers, Kit Kat, Reese, and so again, this one we only want to show if they like sweet foods. So what we'll do is we'll add a property to this field called a show condition. And so the show condition is we're only going to show this question if their answer to the question, do you prefer sweet or salty foods, is salty. And we're only going to show this question if their answer to the do you prefer sweet or salty is sweet. Hopefully that makes sense. So show condition is basically a way for you to define based on the answer to another question, whether to show or hide a different question. So now if we save that and we go back here and we refresh this, you can see right now we're not seeing the question for the chocolates or the chips. But if I select sweet, then suddenly the question for the chocolates pops up. And if I select salty, then the question for the potato chip pops up. And so one of the very common use cases for this, for example, is like, let's say you ask somebody like, do you have a car? You're asking an applicant if they have a car. If they say no, there's no point asking them what make, model, and year their car is. But if they say yes, then you'll probably want a follow-up question saying, what is the make, model, and year of your car? Or let's say you have a variety of different positions that you're recruiting for. Based on which position that they are interested in, you may want to ask follow-up questions specifically related to that position. So show conditions are one of those properties that's very useful for sort of customizing your form to show to show questions that are relevant and not show questions that are not relevant to the particular applicant based on their answers to other questions. Let's see, what other properties do we have here? Has other is another really useful one. So let's say we want to add a, because I don't eat enough chips and I can't think of other chips, but there may be other potato chips that I haven't thought of that people may like. So I'm going to put in other, and then I'm going to add the property has other. And what that will do is if I refresh this now, so I like salty, and I can put other, and because I selected that other property, it shows me now a pop-up field where I can type in something else like Doritos. And now we're going to obviously reject this applicant because Doritos are not a potato chip, but anyways, so that's how that works. Other properties that we have as well, default value. So default value sort of puts a placeholder in. So like, let's say for their favorite restaurant, sorry, so like there's two options. You can put in a default value, or you can put in a placeholder. So we're going to put a placeholder like e.g. McDonald's. And then another useful property that you have is something that we call a field remark. So a field remark is sort of like secondary instructions that you can add below the primary label. So, a restaurant is a place you go to buy food. If I say that, and I refresh our application form, you can see now that it puts in my little instruction set here. Obviously, you're not adding stupid instructions like that, but like, a common example of this is like, let's say you're asking a client, what hourly rate are you willing to offer a babysitter? And then below that, you could say like, hey, the going rate for a babysitter in the Boston area, the minimum is $25 per hour. So please don't offer less than that. Otherwise, you're not going to get anybody, that sort of thing. And you can see my placeholder, e.g. McDonald's, has appeared here. So that's just a placeholder behind the scenes. Once I start typing, the placeholder disappears. But both the placeholder and the field remarks are great ways to offer guidance and instructions to people, so you get responses more in line and more in line with what you actually have in mind. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm just going to keep going through that a little bit. You can also put in a default value. So default value is a little different from a placeholder. Rather than a placeholder, it's actually putting in a specific default value. So, let's say, for example, for what is your favorite brand of potato chip? I think it should, most people select Ruffles. So I'm going to set a default value of Ruffles. And so now if we go here and I refresh this and I prefer salty foods, it pre-selected Ruffles as my default value. So cases where this can be useful, for example, is like, let's say you are asking somebody to put in their, address. And 99% of the people you work with are all in one state. Or a majority of the people you work with are in one city or whatever. It can make sense to put a default value that auto-populates kind of the most common response, so that a majority of your people don't have to write that sort of thing in, because it's already filled in for them. Hopefully that makes sense. That is some of the most common properties. Another one that I think is really interesting that you may want to consider is something that we call not required in application. So what that does is you will probably have the same questions in a candidate profile, plus some more that you might have had in their application form. But sometimes you don't want to make everything required in an application form to not scare people away or not make them feel like they have to do too much in order to get their foot in the door. And so you can mark something as not required in application, in which case it won't be required by them to fill in the application form, but then it will be required once they go back into the profile to fill that in. So, yep, hopefully that makes sense. And so the next step, if we go into, let's say, one of our candidate profiles. So we go into a candidate profile and we look at this candidate profile. We can see here in the sort of menu items that favorite food does not appear here because we didn't actually add favorite food to the candidate profile. So we'll go ahead and add it to the candidate profile. Usually what's going to happen is your candidate profile or your client profile is going to have a lot of the same sections as in the application form, but you may have some additional sections with additional information that you want them to fill in. So we'll go ahead and put in favorite food and select favorite foods. And you can also drag and drop these to reorder. So, you know, favorite food is obviously the most important thing. So we'll put it up there at the top. I save that. And we go back to the candidate profile here. I just refresh that. We can see now that the favorite food section is appearing there. And they can go ahead and fill that in. One of the interesting things you can do also, so once they fill that in, you can see the answers to their questions are appearing here. And so the answers to their different questions are appearing here. Let's say you want to change the way that a question is framed. So when they're answering a question, you want it framed as a question, but when they're viewing their profile, you want to frame it in a different way. So like, you know, when they're filling in the profile, we say, what is your favorite restaurant? But when we're looking at the profile, we wanted to say, my favorite restaurant is. So the way to do that is we go into the favorite foods, and you'll see when you're editing every field, that it has a field label and a profile label. So the field label is what the person will see when they're answering the question, and the profile label is the label that has when you're viewing their profile. And so by default, we kind of keep these the same, but they can be different. So like, let's say we say, my favorite restaurant is, and so I save that. I refresh this. And we can see here now that within the profile, it's going to say my favorite restaurant is, but then if I'm editing it, it says, what is your favorite restaurant? And again, you have this little pencil icon, you can edit this. So let's say you're going through a candidate profile and you want to make some quick edits to some of the questions in the section. You don't need to even mess around with the profile builder. You can go straight into here and edit things like that, whether it's required or not, what you want the question label to be, the view profile label to be, that sort of thing. Hopefully that makes sense. One of the other things, you know, there's so many different things you can do, but let's say, for example, a candidate fills something in their application form. Later, they're going to go into their profile to do something specific, like add their references or upload their documents. You don't want their profile to get super long with all of the information that they filled in before. One useful thing you can do is go into their profile And let's say for the favorites food section, we will collapse the section by default, or in the contact information, we will collapse the section by default. So what that will do is when they're viewing the profile, those sections will be auto sort of compressed. And so if we go into here, we can see that these sections are auto pressed. So they can click the little arrow to open them up, but it just keeps their profile tight with the things that they've already filled in, so they don't need to fill those things in. Another thing that's really important and potentially useful to remember is you may want people to only see certain sections at certain steps in the journey. So sometimes it can make sense, like they filled in their favorite foods when they filled in their application, but I don't want them editing that later. So what you can do is you can go into the settings of the favorite food section, for example, and you can control the visibility of this section based on certain statuses. So let's say I only want them to see this section when they're in the phone screen complete status, but not after that. Or I don't want them to be able to edit the section after they've completed their interview because I don't want them messing around with their profile. So I want them locked from editing that. Or you can also make certain sections only visible to certain types of candidates. So maybe I only want to know the favorite foods of my nanny candidates, but I don't really care about the favorite foods of my on-call candidates. So I can select what types of candidates will see that section. So there's a lot of different options to control the visibility of certain sections based on what stage in the journey someone's in, what type of user they are, that sort of thing. So yeah, wow, already out of time. I hope this kind of made some sense, you know, to really sort of wrap it up. The key thing to understand here is the idea of sections, profiles, and applications. Your applications are made up of a combination of sections. Your profiles are made up of a combination of sections. Your sections are made up of a combination of fields. So try experimenting with that. Try adding a section, try adding fields to a section, try adding properties to your field, see how that goes. Please ask us questions. We're happy to help you anytime. But yeah, I hope that was helpful. Please, you know, ask any questions if you have them. Please feel free to email us with questions. If there's specific kind of high-level topics that you want more information on related to this, please reach out and let us know. Yeah, otherwise, thank you so much for listening in. And yeah, hope to see a lot of you at more of the sessions to come throughout the day. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.